All right, so I haven't been in Ecclesiastes for a hot minute now, so we'll do a quick recap. Um, so the title of this one is The Poverty of Much. And yeah, the poverty of much. And so just to recap real quick, speak up more. I don't know if I could do that. You guys got to come closer. Everybody, come closer. I'm not yelling today. If you can't hear, can you hear me in the back? All right, perfectly. Then it's your ears. I'm sorry. Honestly, it's your ears. But I'll try to talk up. So just to recap Ecclesiastes, I'll recap chapter 1 and 2, and I'll choose um verse 18 of chapter 1, and it says, "For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief." And that really sums up what the teacher has gone over in the first two chapters. Is that he's trying to gain wisdom through any means necessary. He's trying it through pleasure. He's trying it through wine. He's trying it even through folly. He's trying it through women and money and wealth and fame and all these things. And really, he comes to the conclusion that the more that he knows, the more that he sees, the more grief that it brings him. And so I titled this part the poverty of much because he's a man who had much, who had all the things that we desire, and yet he counted it all as meaningless. And so he starts off the book, the words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, meaningless, meaningless, because all of the things that he found as he chased wisdom, as he chased the wind, turned out to be meaningless. And so the teacher was a man who suffered the poverty of much. Again, he had many things, but he was empty. All the things didn't fulfill him. And so he chased fulfillment to the furthest edges, and he still came back empty handed. And he also says, I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. And then he found in all his labors that the more knowledge, the more grief. And so chapter 1 and 2 is really him just giving us a summary of in what ways did he chase wisdom? How did he go about seeking it out? And what was the result of what he found? And I think it's something that we all find as we get older, that when we chase worldly gain, we can acquire wisdom, but that wisdom is almost like a coat, a heavy coat. It protects us, but it comes with the weight of wearing that heavy coat. It comes with the burden of knowing that the world is corrupt and that people can be evil and that things don't always work out the way that they're supposed to, or that we think they're supposed to work out, and that we can do all the right things and we can have all the things that we desired in that moment and still come back empty handed. Although we have all these things, we can fill our lives with things and still feel empty on the inside because the things don't satisfy what we actually need. So the teacher sees this, and he sees it over and over in Ecclesiastes, that as he tries to fill the God-shaped hole in his life, it doesn't actually, you can't put the square peg in the circle hole. It just won't fit, and it won't fulfill that need that he has. And so the teacher is kind of stuck in this loop of, I'm empty, but I have all these things and I don't know what to do with it. I'm trying to fill it. I'm trying to fulfill myself with all these things, and I don't know how to get out of this cycle of everything is everything is meaningless. I'm the richest king that ever existed in Jerusalem. I have all the women I could ever imagine. I have gardens and I have groves, water groves, and I have all these things, and I why am I not fulfilled? And I see in his struggle, the struggle that we can sometimes find ourselves in, and especially that worldly people can find themselves in when they are chasing and seeking after their heart's desires. They can't. they can't seem to actually satisfy that craving, that want, and that longing for something more. And so the teacher does all these things. He struggles and he strives and he toils and he looks at everything done under the heavens, and he finds it all meaningless. And so when you come to this conclusion, when you kind of walk the path that the teacher walked, you're forced to admit that wisdom is actually a burden, and it weighs you down. It reveals the truth of life to a person. It opens your eyes. It takes the scales away from your eyes. You're no longer, um, I won't say innocent, but you're no longer unaware of the world's evils and wickedness, because now you've gained wisdom. Now you know for sure. And so I put here that the teacher's words aren't meant for us just to read them. It's not just a book that we're supposed to glance over and come to the conclusion that, well, everything that we do, all our toil, all the money and houses, everything is meaningless. But there's something deeper there, and it's actually more than just the vanity of vanities that people like to kind of boil the book down to. They read the book of Ecclesiastes and they come away with, well, everything is meaningless, and this is kind of a depressing book. But in reality, the book is really it's a shelter for the needy, it's food for the hungry, it's water for the thirsty. It's really an encouragement, because the teacher isn't always stuck in the cycle. You get glimpses of him seeing beyond what he can only see under the sun. He kind of takes himself to the peaks of human understanding and knowledge and wealth and desire and all these things, and he looks out over that horizon of all these things, and below him is the canyon of all the things done under the sun. And he looks out in this canyon and he sees the meaningless and the repetition of all the things that people go through. But somewhere in looking out over all this meaninglessness, he sees a glimpse of God. And in that glimpse of God, he says, and this will be where the recap ends, and I guess the actual sermon begins, and it's Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 14. And he says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. And so you see that the teacher, it's not always a book of gloom and doom, and that everything we do is meaningless, and that all your toil means nothing. Because in there, he gives you nuggets of truth that should make a person pause for a moment and sit with the idea that, okay, well, all of my toil and all of my doings and all of my wants and desires, they're fading. But whatever God does endures forever. And so that should tell you something about where he's pointing you to and what he's pointing you to, and how you should deal with the repetition of life. Because, I mean, I hope the rapture is, that's a whole different conversation. I'm not going to get into that. But I hope that we are able to not see, I hope we're able to see the coming of Christ. But everybody who's lived before us has come and lived life and passed away, and each one of those individual lives felt like their life was as though they were the main character of the world, and that all their troubles and their woes and all their successes and all these things were the most important thing happening in the universe at that time. When in reality, we're all just in the cycle of what happens under the sun. And so I had this, I thought about this kind of illustration of what it was like for the teacher to toil and to see everybody else toil under the sun. And so I put here, imagine that you worked tirelessly day after day. Every day you were working, you worked 7 days a week. And at the end of that week, your boss comes out and he's like, oh boy, you got a huge paycheck coming to you. You got a fat paycheck. Like you've worked more than anybody I've ever seen work before. And so he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out this huge wad of cash, and you obviously expectantly, you hold out your palm and you're waiting to get your payday. And so your boss unfolds the wad of cash, and he gets to the center, and he pulls out a little speck of lint right from the center of the wad of cash, and he puts it into your palm. I mean, can you imagine the cruelty of that moment when you realize that all of the work that you've put in, all the toil, all the striving, all the sweat and worry amounted to a tiny piece of pocket lint that the boss is giving you now. But the teacher takes it a step further and says that you don't even receive the pocket lint for your striving and your work. You receive absolutely nothing because you die, and all that you worked for isn't taken with you. Everything that you have is left behind to be given over to somebody else, and you don't know how they're going to treat your wealth or all the things that you strove for and stressed about. And they could receive that inheritance and then the next day blow it all, and all your work and all your striving is literally just chasing after the wind. It's toil for nothing. And so this is the situation that the teacher sees in Ecclesiastes, and that's what bothers him and burdens him so much. And that's kind of what wisdom does to a person, because they see that all their toil and all their striving and all that they desire is fleeting and will one day be ultimately taken from them. And so that's why these little nuggets of truth about what endures and who God is and how he actually fits into this endless cycle of toil and losing and death, how he fits into that and how that matters to us and how we walk as Christians and how we should approach God and how we should see God and how we should approach the day to day and our work and our toil and all these things. And if you'll turn with me to Isaiah 26, and it'll be verses 17 through 18, and I'm going to be paraphrasing a little bit, but I think it's the perfect description of what it is to be under the sun, what it is that the teacher is seeing. And so it's Isaiah chapter 26, verses 17 through 18. And Isaiah is he's seeing he's having a moment with God, let's say that. And he's seeing the condition of his people, and he's talking to God about their current condition and their deliverance. And he sums up what he sees in this way. He says, as a pregnant woman about to give birth writhes and cries in her pain, so we were in your presence, speaking of God. But we gave birth to the wind. All their struggle. I mean, can you imagine being in labor pains and going through the hours and struggle of having a baby? You carry the baby to 9 months, you go into labor pains, you go to the hospital, you just, you're writhing, you're having the contractions and all this, and they tell you push, 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 and you push and you push and you push, and then ultimately all that comes out is wind. Not a baby, not a stillborn, not a live crying baby, nothing, just the wind. Can you imagine again the cruelty of that situation, that you struggled and you strived and you labored and you were expectant to have something for all your struggling and your toil, and you just birth the wind. And this is the crushing weight of the wisdom that the teacher has, because he sees all that's done under the sun. He's standing at the very tippy top of what human wisdom and knowledge and fame and money and all these things can get you. And that's what he sees below him as existing under the sun, that the everyday toil of man results in just birthing the wind. You go through all the pain and the labor as though you were gonna give birth to something that you could actually grasp and hold on to, but essentially every person is doomed to just birth the wind, because what they toil and struggle for is meaningless. As the teacher says, it's fleeting, it can't be held on to, it's going to be lost and swallowed up in death when they die. And that's the fate of every man, is to die someday. All of us, unless the rapture happens, are going to die, and all that we have and all that we gained, we can't take it with us. We get buried in a pair of clothes in a casket, or maybe we get cremated and then we really don't take anything because even the body that we had is turned into dust or into ash. And so all our striving does is it doesn't bring salvation. It doesn't bring actual wealth. It doesn't bring anything of meaning. It doesn't do anything. It's literally toil for the win. And again, the teacher is coming to this realization that he can't take anything with us, but he leaves us with something better than his riches and better than his fame and better than all the things that he acquired. He found something of worth that he can actually give to us, and it's the gift that it's the gift of the fact that time and things are good, but there's something greater than the things that we strive and that we work for. And so he goes into the poem of there's a time for everything, but he points to something greater right after. And it's on this peak, on this mountain of the highest point of human wisdom and riches and all these things, that he is able to see the depressing truth and gain the wisdom that all things done under the sun are meaningless, but also, like I said before, that what God does endures forever, and God does this so that people will fear him. And so the word I want to focus on here is from Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 14, is that the teacher says, I know. And the Hebrew word here is, I'm gonna probably butcher this, but it's yada. And it's not to merely understand, but it's to have a intimate understanding, an intimate knowing of what God does in his core. And so it's not just kind of a throwaway word. Oh, I know God does this, but it's something that he's almost, you can say he's experienced. It's something that he's intimate with. It's something that he knows to the core of his being, that whatever God does, he does it and it endures. And not only that it endures, but God does it and works things out this way so that people will fear him. And so we'll get into what the fear of the Lord is, and at least we'll touch on it briefly. But I see the same, I see the same knowing in the story of Abraham. So the teacher only sees in part. He can see all that's done under the sun, but he can only see in part what what God's hand in all of this means. In the same way for Abraham. So I put here, like Abraham, the teacher's wisdom is partial, but that partial wisdom is real. And Abraham obeyed not because he understood the plan, but because he knew the planner. And so the same for the teacher, Solomon, I'll say. It's not that he could see the plans of God and know that all that God would do, but it's that he knew God himself, so he could trust that what God was doing would be beneficial for even the people who toiled for everything that was meaningless. And so it's not so much knowing the plan, but again, it's knowing the planner. It's knowing the person who creates the plan and knowing his goodness, and knowing that what he does endures forever, and that he does desire for us to prosper, and that he's not out to destroy us or just to have all of our doings and toil and work and striving to end up being meaningless. And so in Genesis 22, verse 12, actually, let me back up a little bit. But if you want to flip there, Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. So I put here, this is the beauty of the teacher's wisdom. Like Abraham, it's only partial, but it's real. Yet even in their lack of fully knowing God and his plan, yet even in their lack, the impossible happens. So God tells Abraham, take your son, your only son whom you love, the son of promise, to be sacrificed. And you see here that Abraham takes a 3-day journey to get to the mount that God is asking him to sacrifice the son of promise on. In all 3 days, Abraham is able to sit and think, and at any point he could have turned back or decided that he didn't want to go through with it, but he decides to press forward, not knowing what the plan is, not knowing, how this is going to turn out, but trusting in the planner of the plan. And it's not because Abraham could see the results of his obedience or that he could see the end of the plan. But again, it's because he knew the planner and the fear of the Lord preserved him. It's because he feared the Lord that he was able to go through. And really, Abraham in his heart killed Isaac. He had already come to the conclusion that he was going to go through with killing him. So at this point, Abraham lost everything because Ishmael was already gone. And all he had left was his son of promise. And Abraham was rich in things, but the thing that he loved the most, and you can see kind of God egging it on when he says that take your son, your only son, whom you love, and it's God kind of pushing forward the point that this is all that Abraham has is his son, and Abraham has to in his heart kill his son. And he did. He went through with, I mean, he was willing to, plunge the knife into the heart of his son. And thankfully God, stops him from doing it. But in his heart, he had already decided that Isaac was going to be dead. And it's kind of something that we touched on in the men's group yesterday, where you can only come to God once you've given up everything. You can only come to God empty handed. You can't come to God and present him something or keep a little bit of yourself or a little bit of whatever it is that you desire. That you have to completely give up your will. You have to take up your cross. You have to get on your cross. You have to give up your will, yourself. You have to die to self. And so it's this is an example of that happening pre Christ, because you see here Abraham is giving up everything, again, not because he knew the plan, but because he knew the planner. And I say all this because you see something similar in the teacher. He sees all these things, and yet he calls it meaningless, even though he has all these things, and he strived to get all these things and all this wealth and fame and wisdom and all these things. But for him to gain true wisdom, he has to give up all these things. They have to become meaningless. And the same thing for us. If we want to approach God, if we want to enter the throne room, if we want to be his or just be his, everything has to be given up. Everything has to become meaningless in a sense, and in the right sense, and we'll get into that. But you see the similarity between Abraham and the teacher in that they both didn't know, but they knew something of God, and that allowed them to know some truth, and that partial truth allowed them to align themselves with God properly. And so I put wisdom is not to be, or is not climbed towards as the teacher thought it was. He thought if he could get to the peaks of human wealth and all these things that he would acquire wisdom, but it's not something to be climbed towards. It's something to be bowed into. It's something that we surrender ourselves to. And as he looks out into the distance and he sees the horizon and all the things done under the sun, he he stands and he peers for a moment. He glimpses God, and he sees that wisdom never existed at the peaks of human thought. It never existed at the peaks of how much money I can have or how many houses I can have or how much I can satisfy my own desires, but it exists in the fear of the Lord. And so we get into the part where it talks about um, God does it so that people will fear him. And really here he's saying that that is the place where wisdom can be acquired. That's the place where a person can truly become wise, where they can, in a sense, grasp the wind. And so I focus on the word yada here because the words I know, which in Hebrew is yada, because you also see in Genesis 22:12, where I had you guys turn, that it says, and this is after Abraham does, this is where Abraham says, all right, where Abraham has in his heart killed Isaac, but God saves him and stops him from doing that. And after this whole ordeal, God says, now I know, the same word yada, that you fear God. And so you see here in Abraham's story that it's the fear of God that allowed him to go through with giving up Isaac and sacrificing him to God so that he could um, truly be wise, so that he could truly have something to grasp onto. And it's the same with the teacher. It's only in the fear of the God, only in the fear of God that the teacher is able to attain wisdom. Everything else that he did before, realizing that the fear of God was where wisdom dwells, was meaningless. So the book starts off with meaningless, meaningless, because it was all meaningless. And so here you see the cost of truly becoming wise. Again, the teacher says meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. All godless toil is chasing after the wind. It's everything that we strive for, everything that we desire outside of God is truly meaningless in the most um was that you that yeah. She's so confused. But everything that we do is meaningless. Everything that we do is meaningless outside of God because it doesn't endure. It doesn't have that quality that God does. It doesn't endure forever. It's taken away from us the moment that we pass away. And if it's not taken away at that moment, it could be taken away before we even pass away. And so it's only in the fear of the Lord that we can have the beginnings of wisdom. You okay? You okay? You okay? I think she's okay.
We're just worried about you.
Yeah. And so I put here that the fear of the Lord is it's not terror, it's not anxiety, it's not cowering, but it's seeing God as he truly is and who we truly are and living accordingly. Let me read it one more time. The fear of the Lord is not terror, it's not anxiety, it's not cowering, but it's seeing God as he truly is and seeing yourself as you are and living accordingly. But I will add to that anybody who has this perspective of God, who can see him for who he truly is, that person will shudder. That person will have that fear, that awe of God because they see him as he truly is. They see him as God. They see him in his majesty. They see the burning fiery eyes. They see the voice that's like thunder and many waters. They see all these things that I mean even the prophets could hardly describe. And so when you see God as who he truly is, if you see him in the right sense through the right lens with eyes that don't have scales and veils over them, then you will shudder. You will see your sinfulness in reference to his pure holiness and that he is something to tremble at and to that he can be something that is a terror to people because he is holy and because he is just and because sin can't dwell in his presence. So God does it so that people will fear him. And we know that from Proverbs that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's the place where we truly become wise, when we can truly fear him. But to be able to fear him, we have to see him as he truly is. And so there's people who will receive wisdom with open hands, and much is given to them. When a person comes to God and they ask him for that fear and for that wisdom, it's not God is not in the business of rejecting somebody who has a sincere heart. Um, the things that are good for them and the things that will prosper them and the things that will give them a right vision of him and that will cause them to turn away from their sins, God isn't going to turn down that person, but understand that you have to come to him with a sincere heart and empty hands, because your hands have to be open and able to receive. If your hands are full of life's pleasures and the things that you desire, then you have no room for God and for his fear and for the things that he wants to put into your hands. But for those who cling tightly with closed fists, waging really an unwinnable war and grasping what can't be held, the wind, then they receive nothing, and the little bit that they do have will be taken from them. And so I put here, the words of Christ ring terrifyingly true. And if you want to turn to Matthew 13, verse 12, but I'm going to just read it real quick. It says, whoever has will be given more, and they will have abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken away from them. And I know Christ here isn't speaking specifically about wisdom, but it applies to wisdom. If you're going to come to God with an unsincere heart, closed fist, I can do it. This is my life. I want to live it my way. Then the little bit that you do have that you think will last, the little bit of wisdom that you think you have will be taken away from you because you've toiled for the win. Because the teacher in the very beginning of Ecclesiastes is telling you that all he's done is meaningless. And I'd be hard pressed to find anybody who's done more than the teacher. It's even in this room alone, but let alone in the world today. I'd be hard pressed to find anybody who had more wealth, who had more worldly pleasures, who sought wisdom more than the teacher himself. And in the entire book, he never references what he has done to gain wisdom as purposeful, as lasting, as something that is actually tangible that he can hold on to. It's always something fleeting, it's always a vapor, it's always meaningless, because they were worldly things that he tried to acquire wisdom through. But again, I would challenge you to, as you read through Ecclesiastes, if you read through Ecclesiastes, to take the preconceived notion that this book is a book of everything is meaningless, life is pointless, why do we exist? Take that idea out of your head, because in reality, that's not what the teacher is saying. He's pointing back to, these are all the things that I did and I strove for. And yes, they're meaningless, but God is able to make them meaningful if you will fear him, if you will do them in light of who he actually is, and if you will understand and take the time to get to know the God that created the things for you to enjoy. It's not that food and family and things aren't meant to be enjoyable. They are, but only in their proper place. But you can't have them in their proper place if God isn't in his proper place, which should be as God in your life, on the throne in your life, as the center of your life, and as the person who gives you those good things to enjoy. And the teacher even talks about, that there is, we went over there's a time for everything, but there's also enjoyment to be found in the things that God allows us to put our hands to work on. And I don't mean, specifically work, but even your work, even your job is something to be enjoyed. But the wine and the gardens and the friends and the laughter, all these things are given by God as good things to be enjoyed when they're in their proper place, when they're not your God, when they're not the thing, the end, when they are not the goal. Because even wisdom itself can become a god, and that's really what the teacher here is struggling with. He goes through all these motions to seek out wisdom, because in his mind wisdom is the ultimate thing to have, and he finds that he can't even acquire wisdom through these things, and so he ends up depressed, he ends up hurt, he ends up striving much longer than anybody should, seeking something that he was never going to acquire. And it's only after he acquired it all and in a sense, in his heart, lost it all because now it's all meaningless to him. Now all the money and power and fame and all these things that he acquired at the end of his life are meaningless, and he had to lose all of that to come to the conclusion that wisdom isn't here. Wisdom isn't at this peak. Wisdom isn't below in the canyon either. It's in the fear of God. It's where it's in the place that I wasn't looking. And it's almost in the place that I can't physically go to, but it exists there. And I need to stop striving to get it and receive it. And I think I like to think that the author of Ecclesiastes is Solomon, and at the end of his life, he comes to the conclusion that that we need to obey God and fear Him, and so he was saved. But it took him a lifetime of striving and struggling to get there. It took him a lifetime of amassing all the things that we desire to have and losing it to come to the conclusion that wisdom isn't here. Wisdom isn't in these things, and I was never going to get it through these means, but that it exists far off in the fear of God, and the only way for me to get it is to receive it, and the only way to receive it is to have empty hands. And so, I have a footnote for Ecclesiastes. And it says, and I really like this, Solomon highlights two kinds of wisdom in the book of Ecclesiastes. First is human knowledge, reasoning, and philosophy. And the second is the wisdom that comes from God. In these verses, Solomon is talking about human knowledge. When human knowledge ignores God, it only highlights our problems because it can't provide answers without God's eternal perspective and solution. So where are you seeking your wisdom from? Yeah. Because we often think we're right about the majority of things in life when we're only seeking human knowledge and direction. Yeah. Where if we were seeking Christ first and removing our desires at once, which often aren't what we need, it would change everything. Yeah. There's a wisdom that a person can have. What wisdom do you want? Yeah. Well, what wisdom do you want? Do you want the fleeting wisdom? Do you want the wisdom that doesn't last, or do you want the wisdom that you can actually grasp and hold on to, that will be eternal, something that you can give and pass down, and something that you can take with you into the afterlife? And again, all these things, they're not bad. Knowledge isn't bad. To know things isn't bad. To be smart isn't bad. To have worldly wisdom isn't bad. We live in the world. We have to navigate it. But if you're looking for something eternal, if you're looking for riches that actually last, if you're looking for something that can sustain and preserve a person, then it has to be more than worldly wisdom, because no matter what, no matter how wise you are in the world, you're going to die. Time is going to take its toll, and you're going to pass on. And what are you going to have when you pass on? Because I think on some level, some people think that to die is to cease to exist. But we know that to die isn't to cease to exist, but it's to, in a sense, go somewhere else, to move to a different plane, to no longer be in the body, but to be in the presence of God. And so that's one of the reasons that I use the Isaiah quote, because he talks about it was in the presence of God that they were like the writhing woman. It's not that they were actually pregnant. It's not that there was actually a pregnant woman in the presence of God, but it's the people of Israel. It's Isaiah himself, as he was in the presence of God, he writhed. He was struggling and toiling and doing all these things, and it amounted to nothing. It amounted to their destruction, actually, because it caused them and led them to sin and to be under the judgment of God. And I see that in the life of the teacher, if you want to call him Solomon. He built this huge castle. He built this mountain of things, and at the end of his life, it all comes crumbling down because it didn't have eternal worth. It didn't mean anything. He spent his life striving for things that would be handed over to another person instead of something that would last and be eternal. But again, I really push home the point that he had to lose all of that in the same way Abraham had to lose what he loved to gain wisdom, to enter the fear of the Lord. It was only once they lost what they loved, it was only when they lost what they toiled for, when they lost everything, that they could enter into the fear of God and then have wisdom, and that wisdom preserves them. but you can't enter the wisdom without first losing everything. And so this book is a perfect example of that because the teacher has everything to lose. And so that makes it even more desperate and hard for him to lose it because, I can look at my bank account and be like, oh, it's okay if I lose that $5. That's all I had. It didn't, like, I'm going from broke to broke. It didn't matter. But he he had, all the money in the world to lose, billions of dollars. And, what does it look like when you wake up one day with $1 billion in your bank account and the next day you have zero, you know? Yeah, you'd be devastated by that. And so the teacher is devastated by the fact that he gets to this peak. He's the epitome of everything that a worldly person will want, and he looks out over all this, the things he has, and it's just rubble, it's just trash, it's just nothing, it's meaningless. It can't save him. It can't free him from the grips of death. It can't give him salvation. It can't make him wise. It doesn't give him happiness. It does nothing. It's just things that he acquired. But again, I say that this book isn't meant to depress you. It's meant to point you towards God, because as he goes through these cycles over and over and over again, he kind of squeezes out these little truths about God, like 3:14, where he says that all that God does will endure, and that God does this so that we might fear him. It's not just a one-off. It's not just something he's throwing out there. He's, in a sense, all his striving for all these worldly things resulted in him actually pulling out a nugget of truth that resulted in him gaining some actual wisdom, which was that what God does endures, and that God sets up things these ways so that we might fear him, so that if we fear him, in seeing that all that I can strive for in my life can result in nothing, then if I fear him, then I can actually gain wisdom. And if I gain wisdom, then I can have something that is of eternal worth. And then all these things that I do have, all these worldly things, don't have to be meaningless anymore. They can have meaning. I can enjoy them. I can take them as gifts from God and know that the little time that I do have on the earth, that I can enjoy my days. I can enjoy my work. I can enjoy the trinkets and things that I have because they come from God and his work is eternal. And so it's not a book of depressing or depression and everything is meaningless. It's really a, a narrative of a man who has spent his whole life striving and what he has received from all his striving, which is nothing. But when he comes to the conclusion that all this is nothing and he loses everything and he drops the facade, then he can enter into the fear of the Lord. And that's really where he's pointing us to enter into, which is the fear of the Lord, so that we might have wisdom. And I find the teacher funny because he kind of gets these nuggets of truth, and it seems like he doesn't even realize that he's got the nugget of truth. He has the wind in his hand now, and he doesn't realize it, and he still continues to seek and to chase, even though he's come to the conclusion that it's all meaningless and that you have to enter the fear of the Lord to enter wisdom. And yet he, right after, is gonna go right back into, let me go chase the world again. Let me go see what the world has to offer. And he's confused and he's baffled by it. But I think even that has a purpose, because it's what we do. We know the truth of things. We know that Christ is the answer to all the things, but oftentimes we'll run into a situation and the first response isn't, let me run to God or see what he says about it. It's, how can I fix it? How can I, with my worldly knowledge, fix this spiritual issue that I'm having? How can I say it the right way? How can I be there the right way? How can I just do it in my own way instead of seeking the Lord and seeing what he says about the situation? So I pray, even knowing this, some people, even knowing the truth, some people will still prefer striving to surrender. They'll get where the teacher is, they'll see all the meaninglessness of it, and they'll still decide that striving and working and toiling for something that they can attain is better than surrendering to what God has already said and planned for people. That if they just fear him, then they can be wise. And if they can be wise, then they can find enjoyment in all their trinkets. So they'll mistake understanding for obedience, and they keep accumulating pocket lint. So they'll keep accumulating the pocket lint, and they'll think that if I can have enough things, then I can be comfortable. And if I'm comfortable, then I never have to fear. And to not fear the Lord is to pretend the ocean is a puddle and that a tidal wave is but a ripple. And the teacher calls this a grievous evil. It's to pretend that God isn't as magnificent as he actually is, to make him small so that we can feel big and so that we can feel comfortable and so that we don't have to fear, because God is small and it doesn't matter if what he does endures forever because I'm bigger and I know better and I can do better than him. And so why do I need to surrender and why do I need to fear? And then we can wonder why life seems like an endless moving from one fire to another fire to another fire. We're not actually putting out any of the fires. It's just moving from one fire to another fire. Why is it snowballing? Why is every day a struggle? And why is every week a struggle? And every month a struggle? And it's because we lack surrender. And surrender is a hard thing. Again, imagine what it took for Abraham to walk 3 days to a place that he didn't even know that God had to guide him to, knowing that he was going to have to sacrifice his son, and coming to terms with the fact that he would have to lay him on the altar and stab him to death. That's the reality of the situation. And every step of the way, he doesn't know the plan. He doesn't know that God's gonna provide a ram. He doesn't know that God's gonna save him last minute. So in his heart, in his mind, and in his heart, he's killed Isaac. He's done it already, and that's what leads him to the fear of the Lord. He surrendered to what God had asked him to do. He surrendered to God, even though the situation was hard, even though it was unbearable. The idea that I'm not only going to have to kill my son, but this is the son through whom the nations are supposed to be blessed. I'm supposed to kill him. And so this is why the teacher sees it as a grievous evil, because even though the teacher can't see fully himself, he knows that to not surrender, to not give God the proper place he deserves is a grievous thing for a person to do, even though they might live their whole life in comfort, even though they might have all the things that Solomon had. Solomon can see clearly enough to know that it's meaningless and it's purposeless without God. And so, after all that the teacher's seen, he stands at the top of this mountain, at the peaks of human thought, and he's stripped of everything that he has, all his worldly adornments, and he says, chapter 3, verse 14, which is, I know that everything God does, everything he does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken away from it. God does it so that people will fear him. And the point that I want to press home today, and this will be where I close, is that you have to decide for yourselves in your own life if you're going to bow and surrender to God and enter the fear of the Lord, or if you're going to continue to strive and toil and seek and do things your own way. If you're going to go the way that the teacher is pointing you towards. And he saw this before he had Christ, before we had Christ, before we had a fully formed Bible, before we had all the knowledge and podcasts and radio stations and churches on every corner. He could see this truth without all that. And so we stand here today with all the food, milk, meat that God provides for us, with the option or the choice to either fear the Lord or to continue in our own ways. And every day is going to be a choice, because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Some of us might not make it home today. So I leave you guys with the same choice the teacher leaves the reader in 3:14. It's to, will you fear the Lord, or will you continue in your own striving and build up your mountain of pocket lint and make God out to be a puddle and the tidal wave to be a ripple, and to not see with clarity the things that God has spoken clearly to us if you will seek him out. That's all I got.